I remember right around 2012, my dad was badgering me to go start a podcast. Like for some reason, he knew what podcasts were, even when nobody in the Philippines was really paying attention to podcasts
Really?
at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, by this point, I think podcasts were already a thing in the U.S., but not here in the Philippines because we're way behind. My dad though was like, "Yeah, you should try it," and I'm like, "With what equipment?" Because at the time I didn't have all of this. So I asked my boss at like 2 years later, 2014, when Ro finally gave me the push for us to finally start recording a podcast. I talked to our old station manager and the owner of the radio station I worked for. And I was like, hey, can we record here? Whatever we make, we'll give you a share of the dividends or whatever. And he was like, yeah, sure. You can use the equipment, the electricity, the internet as much as you want, as long as you learn production, because then I'll be able to get that from you.
How are you guys?
Doing great. Yeah. Good morning to you from the Philippines. Thank you for reaching out to us. It's amazing that, there are other Filipino content creators on wrestling, syempre, on the other side of the world.
Yeah. I've been excited for this because it's not every day we get to be on the other side now.
Yeah.
We're the ones being interviewed. So, I'm pretty pumped to do this.
Thank you so much. It's almost something at the Filipino. We were talking on the pre-show, the Tagalog slips out. So I might slip it. I'll throw in a subtitle. I'll do my best to make it as English as possible. But for you guys, of course, with everything wrestling, you guys started out as fans. Do you guys remember your first experience as fans in the wrestling industry?
Yeah. So I'll go first. Okay, so my first exposure to wrestling was through the video games. So I'm sure I've seen wrestling here and there. I've seen the Hulk Hogan's, the Ultimate Warriors of the world before I was a real wrestling fan. But the first time I ever experienced it was through video games on the PlayStation, on the original PlayStation. I had Warzone. I don't know if you guys remember that game for the PS1. I think it was Acclaim who made the game, and my mom didn't want us to be anywhere near wrestling, so we had that. I don't know why we bought it. Somebody bought it for us, and it was quickly banned in the home. As young impressionable kids, my mother was right, by the way, in that you watch wrestling, you play wrestling, you imitate that stuff at home. So there's a reason for the whole "don't try this at home, kids," or "don't try this anywhere." So it eventually grew. We got older. We started tuning in to wrestling on TV, and then the rest is history. My brother got me into watching wrestling, and then I ended up being the lone wrestling fan after all these years.
Yeah, for me, it's my dad. He was a big wrestling fan in the 80s and the 90s, so I remember him watching during the Attitude Era. Like, I'd catch him watching Stone Cold Steve Austin opening a can of whoop ass, and then I'd wander in, wondering what's going on. And then my mom would run in and try to drag me out of there. And then sometime in the early 2000s, my sister and I would be going through cable. We'd find wrestling, and every chance we'd get, we'd try to watch until our mother would come in, and we'd quickly hit the remote so we could switch to another channel and not be caught, even though I'm pretty sure she knew. And then it wasn't until the 2003 Survivor Series feud between Team Austin and Team Bischoff that I really got hooked in.
Wow.
And didn't really turn back from there. Started watching Eddie Guerrero and found a hero. Found my own personal hero to root for, and then never really looked back.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I was going to ask too, with Ro, you've done some time in the ring. How has that fan suddenly become the wrestler as talent when you started doing training and doing your in-ring experiences as a wrestler?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know exactly what you quite mean. How that I know, but I always knew I wanted to be a wrestler. I was a scrawny kid growing up, though. I'm like 5'7". I'm in any.
It's Rey Mysterio.
Yeah, exactly. And then you know how Rey Mysterio is treated, but he's not really. If it wasn't for him being really acrobatic and high flying, then nobody would take him seriously. But 20 years later, we've changed that perception, and now people my size can be, pass can pass for wrestlers if they have that same if they have a believable enough style. But to me, growing up, I immersed myself in the not the culture, but the inner workings, if you will, of wrestling training. Like I knew how it was. I read Edge's book in the mid 2000s, and I saw how he broke into the business, how he started training, and I expected hardships like that. I just didn't know if I could, ever be something in the U.S. because back then in the U.S. or maybe Japan, I didn't even know about Japan back then. But you had to go somewhere else from the Philippines to really have a shot at being a wrestler, and that was the goal back in the day. And I think some of us also had that same goal, that we would try to fly out and learn how to be wrestlers abroad. But when the opportunity started here, I also knew that as a fan who read up on it, it can't be just any backyard shindy experience. It has to be legit training. But for a little while, I doubted whether the training that we had as a young grassroots movement was the kind of training we should be doing. But eventually it proved naman, and we also grew over time, that it was it was a good start. It was a decent foundation. It wasn't just any just playing around and messing around. So I think some fans come into it with the expectation that it's just like copying your favorite wrestlers in your bedroom with your siblings at home with your friends. Right. But yeah, and then some other fans like myself know that it's serious. It's super serious. And I think if you don't know the ins and outs, that's going to be beaten out of you really quickly. And I would like to think that I knew that it was supposed to be serious, and a lot of the people I trained with knew also that it was supposed to be serious. And I like to think that we've come a long way since then.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like with the Filipino wrestling scene, and this is for Rowan, for Stanley, and I was immersed. I emigrated in the U.S. from the Philippines. I never really got to understand like the Filipino wrestling scene. How has that changed over time?
Okay, so yeah, before San says anything, are you familiar with Pinoy wrestling from the 80s and 90s from RJTV? Did you?
I was way too young. I was way too young.
So people like to use that as a frame of reference for Filipino wrestling, but that was a thing that they copied the new generation WWF from back in the day, and then now 10 years ago, it's almost 10 years ago to this day, we tried to do our own thing, and it was pretty much an indie influence thing, influenced by the American indie. So that's what it is now.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's funny because the Pinoy wrestling, which Ro alluded to, existed between 1986 and about 1990 or 1991 before RJ pulled the plug on that show, right? So in a way, it actually existed before New Generation WWF. You had very stereotypical and politically incorrect characters like Iggy Igorot, which was a satire on the institution up back north, right? So like it's funny because it's kind of stupid, but also it was a product of its time, right?
Right.
Yeah, the Smoky Mountain Brothers, who were a parody of Smoky Mountain, which was like the most famous landfill and waste dump in Metro Manila back in the 80s and 90s. You also had their version of Hulk Hogan in Macho Franco and Joe Poggi. So you had those two guys. So those are really the, I guess you could call them the OGs of the Filipino wrestling scene. But as Rose said, sometime in the early 2010s, there were a bunch of people who got together, literally started over a Facebook group, and they decided to put up their own promotion, which was influenced by the American indies, and I guess influenced by the type of stuff they would see on the internet. So it right around the same time, Ro and I weren't connected with these people yet, but we also thought about covering wrestling here in the Philippines, not necessarily knowing that there was a scene that was bubbling under, waiting to be born. We just wanted to talk wrestling. So, we just wanted to get on the mic and be like, here's a wrestling podcast by Filipino wrestling fans for Filipino wrestling fans before we even knew that either of us would be involved in the wrestling scene locally.
You guys were basically just like setting the trail for building up the wrestling scene in the Philippines. And I'm curious, especially in the American influences, what were some of the things that that got picked up from, let's say, EWW? Like, what were some influences that showed up from there?
Whoa, boy. For one thing, the early Filipino, well, not even early, but this generation of Filipino wrestlers, when they started, a lot of them wanted to be Western influenced. So a lot,
down to the names, they wouldn't use
really.
They would use like names that you would probably get from some American comic book.
Yeah, dude.
Okay.
Basta, I mean, they were very Filipino, but the names would be really American.
I'm sorry, Mayhem Brannigan was not Filipino at all. We had one character named Mayhem Brannigan. The name is not Filipino. His character wasn't Filipino either. He fancied himself as this anarchist type of character. But all he really did was carry around a baseball bat and wear a Friday the 13th mask type of thing.
Yeah, he sounded like an Irish hooligan, but he was not. So there was a lot of that. So it was a lot of guys living out their creator wrestler dreams, if you will. So that was a big thing. We also had like a few halfies, right? So half Filipino, half another ethnicity. So that they're okay to be kind of
they
Western.
Get a pass.
Yeah, they get a bit of a pass. But a lot of, and I still see some of it now. Actually, that even now, even after we've long moved from those tropes, I still see some kids take on names like that. I'm not gonna name names here, but you can see them if you look hard enough. So that's a big influence. People wanted to be. I guess they wanted to escape being Filipino. I don't know.
Subconsciously, whether they were aware of it or not, right? I mean, on the flip side, the early Filipino wrestling scene also had some characters that would actually be uniquely Filipino. Like we have this one guy who's still active today. His name is Canto Terror, which is a pun.
So on the nose.
So like you're Filipino, so you get the pun, right? He was billed from Canto Tino in Barangay 69 or whatever the hell. So there was that. And then he had a tag team partner for a while whose name was Mark Di Manalo. So not only was that a Filipino name, but it was also a play on some internet wrestling terms, right? So Mark Di Manalo, because, he was a Mark who was supposed to not win. He was supposed to be enhancement talent. So
but he won.
But he ended up winning, actually ended up getting over. So together, because Cantotero was a drunkard, and then Mark Di Manalo was from the province, they called themselves Beer Promdi, because Promdi is a term that refers to people from outside Metro Manila.
And obviously, it was a beer money reference to James Storm and
Bobby
Roode.
Yeah.
So not just that. So because syempre, we don't have any other reference in pro wrestling, the style that we took up was pretty much American influence. So I think wrestling is universal anyway. But
of course,
if you watch a local show, not knowing anything about wrestling, obviously people are gonna think now, oh, they're copying WWE, they're copying whatever, right?
No, it's Pinoy whatever, Pinoy Rey Mysterio or whatever.
Exactly. So obviously you can't escape that influence, but it wasn't like we were also stealing from Japan, or we weren't stealing from Pulores or King's Road or Strong Style. It was also really American style and the indie style as well, because we wanted to do the fun indie stuff.
Yeah, I'm curious. I was gonna ask you, like, when did that shift become from the American style? When did you notice to see that it's truly Filipino? When did that shift happen?
That's a good question, because that shift hasn't happened yet. I will say that there are attempts to develop ongoing attempts to develop a uniquely Filipino style. And even as a wrestler, though, and as a wrestler who's thought about a lot of this and who's trained quite a small variety of different styles, I can't tell you what a Filipino style would look like and what that would be, or what that would have to be in order to be successfully Filipino, right?
Right.
You have British, Mexican, Japanese, American, and I don't know what other niche a Filipino style would have to fill to become its own unique thing. So and the thing is, personally, I can't speak to others because I know others want a Filipino style, but I don't really look for one. I don't really need one because I would just rather wrestle in a way that people can, resonate with. I mean, it's all just violence, it's all just action, and it's also just emotion as well. I feel like it doesn't have to be its own Filipino thing for Filipino wrestling to be successful.
Yeah, I'm going to add a couple of points to that. Sometime last year, Ro and I were working for a company that no longer exists, and our showrunner at the time cut this very impassioned promo in the ring where he was saying that he wanted our company to not be America, not be Mexico or Japan. He wanted it to be uniquely Filipino, and I had a very huge problem with that because Filipino culture is very hard to define, right? So like if you're going to say that this is uniquely Filipino because like we're a matriarchal society, Black culture is also very matriarchal. So how can you say that we're uniquely Filipino in that respect? If you're going to say that Filipino wrestling is inherently Filipino because it's got the telenovela aspect of it, where you've got the downtrodden baby faces who are getting beaten down by the system or getting beaten down by these affluent characters who are very power hungry. The telenovela structure is from Mexico, right? And it's not even uniquely Mexican because that's a type of storytelling that is universal. So what is uniquely Filipino? I still can't answer that. And so like Ro, I don't look for it. I don't think we need it. And I think for the scene itself, we have to establish ourselves first and actually prove that we can hang with everybody in the scene, that we're an actual professional wrestling industry, which in the 10 years that Pinoy wrestling has existed in its current form, we've taken 2 steps forward, 1 step back so many times. So I think the bigger priority is making sure that the scene thrives and actually becomes something sustainable.
Yeah, and it's interesting you brought that up where it's still there's still a reaction aspect to it. And I was thinking when I was like thinking about the question at the time, because there is still some shades of a lot of what professional wrestling is, and especially here in the US, which is kind of interesting because it's still a mixture of all of the states that were involved.
Right.
In here in the US, like there, and being in Texas, it's the state of Texas. It's like it's its own scene. But you also have New York. You still have LA. You still have Florida. You still have all the way up to Minnesota, even in Canada, because each scene is different. But at the same time, I'm noticing that too. And as I'm starting to like research a lot of what the Filipinos get, there really isn't one unique one. There's always a shade of WWE or a shade of New Japan Pro Wrestling. So it was kind of like an eye-opening thing for me when I was researching. I'm like, wow, it's just like in the US, and it's still the fan reaction at the end of the day. Once that resonates and how that scene is growing, then you might want to throw in, like what makes it unique more than anything else.
I don't think we should be looking for what makes it unique because that is, I feel, a form of, intellectual, self-pleasure, if you will, because, I feel like a lot of people who want it to be something unique just wanted to do so, as a way of being a hipster about it. I mean, like, okay, to be proud of something that, it's different. It's not like anything else. Like, come on, it's wrestling, and people aren't gonna tune in. They're not gonna go to a show. They're not gonna buy a ticket to a show and sit there and watch expect a certain style. Like I want this wrestling to be Japanese inspired or whatever. Like, they just want the good stories. They want the emotion, the drama, the good looking action as well.
Yeah, I think to add to that, the more important thing here is establishing Filipino characters. Characters that the local scene can actually get behind because they recognize these people as characters that exist in their own world, in their own society, right? So I remember when Ro and I attended the very first actual show in the modern era as we know it today. There's this one dude who stood out. His name was D. Nelson Jr. and his gimmick was he was the barangay basketball player. And a barangay is like your neighborhood, right? So he came out with like the headband and then the rinky-dink jersey and the shorts, and he had a ball, right? And we were like, this would actually be a very fun Spirit Squad type of faction if he had an entire starting five with him and they all played their respective positions. Then that would be Filipino because, you know, every Pinoy kid knows what it's like to roll up to your barangay basketball court and find, four other guys and play pickup. So that's something that speaks to our sensibilities. And whenever the local fans see a character that they can actually get behind because they're like, I recognize that from local pop culture. I recognize that from the people I work with in the office or from social media. Then they can say that that's Filipino. It's not necessarily in the style where like, oh, that's Pures or that's Lucha Libre or that's Catch as Catch Can. It's more of for me, it's more of the characters and what type of stories they're able to tell.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because now, like, besides your time in the ring, and you also, and for Stancio, like you guys had your time in commentary. One thing I noticed with Stan is he's the Filipino commentator at WWE. For both you guys, how do you guys approach commentary, especially with the foreign promotion, or in this case, with Stan, or in the local scene with Bro? Like, how do you guys approach commentary in that aspect?
You want to go first, Ro?
Okay, it's okay. For me, okay. I think I'm more clearly defined as a color commentator, more than Stan is, because I don't think they are as defined over there. But to me, the way I approach it is I am bringing with me 10 years of wrestling knowledge and friendships and networking around the region. So I am doing my best to fill in everything that I feel the viewer needs to know about what they're watching on screen, whether it's the relationships of the characters they were watching, or the effects and the impacts of the moves that they see. So I always want the viewer to watch, to come away from watching the broadcast knowing a lot more than they came in.
Mm-hmm. For us in the WWE commentary team, we actually do have the defined roles as well. And I guess it just gets muddied up because we work remotely. So the way it happens is we don't go to the States or we don't go to Saudi Arabia for the shows, right? And so internet issues happen, as you know, right? So
Right.
Sometimes one of us drops out of the call just because of things we can't control. And one of us has to play the role of the other guy. So whenever my broadcast partner, Carlo Pamintuan, is either lagging or dropping out, I have to step in and play Joey Styles and be the one-man commentary team. And he has to do the same thing as well when he's actually the lead commentator. But that being said, what I try to do is I try to provide the type of layering that the casual fan won't know about a certain character, especially somebody new who they're seeing for the first time. So like when somebody like an Ilya Dragunov or like a Braun Breaker shows up on a WWE premium live event for the first time, I feel like my job as a color commentator is to explain who this guy is and why they're a big deal heading into the main roster. Stuff like how Braun Breaker's a two-time NXT champion, or Ilya Dragunov is one of only 3 men who have defeated Gunther one-on-one in a singles match in WWE. Or sometimes when a newer wrestler like Tama Tonga steps in, I beef him up by saying things like he's a 7-time IWGP Tag Team Champion. So it's basically the same role that your Corey Graves is, or your Wade Barrett's, or your Pat McAfee's play, just in Tagalog, with Tagalog pop culture sprinkled in there for relatability.
What is your favorite match that you like to call?
Okay.
Type of match, or like a match that's existed?
That you guys covered as
Okay. My favorite match that I called so far was a main event late last year. So Stan was actually involved in that main event as manager. So it was a bit of a convoluted match. It started out as an elimination tag match, Survivor Series match, and then when it came down to 2 people left on the same team, they duked it out for the top championship of the company. So that was a bit of a that was a bit of a messy thing, but I think we made it. I think we all made it come across as sensible and logical. And then there's a big story involving my tag team partner in that match. So I was able to bring out the emotion, and I hope that I made people watching feel how emotionally heavy this entire angle was. So I had a lot of fun, um, uh, just bringing that out of the moment. And I feel like if I, not to, prop myself up too much here, but if I weren't there, I don't think it would have landed as hard.
Yeah, for me, it's probably a toss-up between Gunther and Sami Zayn or Cody Rhodes versus Roman Reigns from this past WrestleMania, just because of the emotion of it all. I try to skew heel when I do color commentary for WWE, but sometimes you just can't help but get swept up in the emotions, especially when someone who is a very clearly defined underdog, like a Sami Zayn, like a Cody Rhodes, they're actually able to topple down that insurmountable opponent, right? So I remember distinctly after Sammy hit the Helluva kick on Gunther and fell for the 1-2-3. I just yelled Sammy and my voice broke and I started to cry on commentary. And like these are parts of genuine emotions that you can't really write. You can't really fake these things, right? So you can call wrestling whatever you want, but these are the moments that really make you believe this is the shit we live for,
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to turn to the wrestling podcast. You kind of brought it up earlier in the conversation. When you first, when you guys first started, were just two people. Like, what was the mission statement when you guys were starting the podcast?
We just wanted to talk about wrestling. No, because I was coming off of being a columnist for lordsofpain.net, the former lordsofpain.net, which is now wrestlingheadlines.com. And I had been writing about wrestling and for a few years now by then. And I just wanted to talk about it. I just wanted to talk about wrestling. And I felt like, podcasts were the next step in that desire to talk about wrestling. And I thought that we had, Stan and I had, the chops to talk about it. I didn't think we would be something big. I just thought that we were an outlet for ourselves and maybe other wrestling fans who wanted someone to talk with or someone to maybe echo or process their feelings.
Yeah, I remember right around 2012, my dad was badgering me to go start a podcast. Like for some reason, he knew what podcasts were, even when nobody in the Philippines was really paying attention to podcasts at the time. Yeah, by this point, I think podcasts were already a thing in the U.S., but not here in the Philippines because we're way behind. My dad, though, was like, yeah, you should try it. And I'm like, with what equipment? Because at the time, I didn't have all of this. So I asked my boss at like 2 years later, 2014, when Ro finally gave me the push for us to finally start recording a podcast. I talked to our old station manager and the owner of the radio station I worked for. And I was like, hey, can we record here? Whatever we make, we'll give you a share of the dividends or whatever. And he was like, yeah, sure. You can use the equipment, the electricity, the internet as much as you want, as long as you learn production, because then I'll be able to get that from you. Like if you have to step in and do production work for the station. I'm like, all right, sounds like a fair deal. So we spent the first couple of years of the podcast actually recording in the production room of the radio station that I worked for at the time. But it was a very rinky-dink operation from back in the day, like most independent efforts are. But, those were the humble origins of the Wrestling podcast, which I guess, looking back, are way better than others' maiden efforts because we actually had a proper mic, a proper recording console, and a computer to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. When it started to grow, like, when did you observe, what did you notice when Wrestling podcast became a thing? Like, what did you guys notice when the fans are started like, hey, we have a podcast that's specifically here?
I don't know. It surprises us because we never really think we are as big as we are. A fellow now a peer, I would say. We recorded with him last week, and then he was telling us that we were pillars of wrestling podcasting in the Philippines. Like, what?
Really? Wow, that's a tall order.
Yeah, it is a tall order. Because we never really feel like it because we don't get compensated like it either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
We don't make money from this shit. So
yeah. I mean, it's. I think the milestone would be getting signed by a podcast network in in Podcast Network Asia back 5 years ago. But that was it. It was also a startup, much like we were. So we didn't really feel the gravity of it.
I would say that the podcast, if anything, we felt like we, I guess, mattered or made an impact when other Filipino wrestling podcasts started to sprout out. Like when they started doing their thing, we were like, all right, we're onto something here, because clearly other people knew that we existed and they wanted to do something similar, right? And we started calling ourselves the longest running weekly episodic Filipino wrestling podcast as a joke on what Michael Cole used to say about Monday Night Raw every time he would open the show. So it was really just ripping off of that, and then it became a thing of its own where people would actually quote it word for word and use it to validate our existence and say that, yeah, you guys are the OGs because you're the longest running, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, I guess that's something, because outside of not getting paid, all we ever really got from the podcast is, if not like, external validation, it's opening doors to other things. Like it helped Ro and I make contact with the local scene, which led to Ro's in-ring career. For me, it gave us opportunities to interview wrestlers both here and abroad, both in WWE, outside of WWE, which led to what I would say is eventually my own connection with the actual WWE, which is crazy to think about in its own way.
Yeah, and what was it, Mitch? I did see some of those interviews over the course of the podcast. What was the one guest that wows you?
Oh, the one guest. Honestly, anyone we get from WWE.
Yeah.
We're still with WWE. So we've had Dragunov, we've had Pretty Deadly, we've had
Drew.
Drew, yeah, we have had Drew.
Wow, that's right.
Anytime that the WWE machine is able to think of us and hook us up, it's always a good thing. It's always a great, amazing thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We were kind of lucky that we got to talk to Grayson Waller literally a month before he announced he'd signed with NXT.
Yeah.
And I'm sure at that time he already knew what was going down, but he was like, "Oh yeah, let's do the interview." He was still Matty Wahlberg at the time. Shout out to our friend Robbie Eagles, who we get on the podcast every year. He got us to talk to Grayson Waller before he became Grayson Waller.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious when you guys are having co-hosts who have like similar ideas, and especially when you guys do host like recaps with Dynamite, with SmackDown or Raw. How has collaboration been a big part for you guys when you do the podcasts?
It has. I think it has made the conversations better. Not all the time, but at least there's more ideas to go off of. There's more points to riff off of, and I do get the feedback from listeners that having more people on makes it more entertaining, and I think the less it feels like we're just talking to ourselves, the better it is.
Yeah. I like to treat it as a TV show, and you don't go into a talk show or a TV show without a script, right? So in our case, we write this outline of topics, so we know we're going to discuss in whichever order, and we even have it down to like, okay, take a break here. So the fact that we're able to do like a live talk show in front of our listeners every Thursday at 7 p.m., it's pretty fun to do. It's something that we just thought of doing during the lockdown era at the height of the pandemic, just to mix things up, make the podcast a little bit more interesting, and give us all something to do while we're all stuck at home. And strangely, it's stuck. Now I can't go out on Thursday nights because we're doing a podcast. We're doing a live stream, right? And it's become appointment viewing for some of our listeners. So it's kind of crazy how that's all happened in the last 4 years. And, I mentioned I started in radio, and now I'm no longer in commercial radio. But the fact that we're able to do these live streams and engage and interact with our viewers in real time, it kind of helps scratch that itch that, that I had since I've been forced to leave radio.
Right. And I'm curious, especially with a lot of podcasting now, like, I'm sure consistency has been a key part for every podcast. How does that play into your growth with the Wrestling podcast?
I think it helped us secure our spot in the network. Yeah, I feel like we aren't a big enough deal for our home network, and I feel like the fact that we have cultivated a niche and a loyal audience, I think is fair to say, has made them see our value to them. And we couldn't do that without sticking to the schedule, right? Even before the live streams, we would release episodes every week, every Friday, sometime around those times. And the fact that our fans know that there is new content every week, no matter whether they check or not, is only good for us. And it's the thing that will take us, or will keep carrying us into the future.
Yes, at this point, we have 2 recording sessions a week, which leads to 5 episodes a week, which is crazy, right? These are the times we live in where we're able to pump out 5 episodes a week. And I think the consistency of it all also helps us keep the brand relevant, keep the brand alive, so that when we engage with external partners, like when we mount events with sports bars, like say a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam viewing party, or the WWE 2K24 tournament that we're mounting on SummerSlam weekend, we're able to say that, yeah, this brand exists because we have this type of content that comes out regularly. We have so-and-so amount of fans that like to engage with us. Here are the videos of people going nuts at the WrestleMania viewing.
Yeah.
So you know what type of following we're able to pull in if we hook up with your bar. So it's that type of consistency, I guess, that leads to the events that do help us make the money that keeps us going.
And it keeps the name. It keeps the name at least fresh every single day when you guys have those have these like events over time.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, I was gonna ask this too, but I guess we'll switch roles because I'm the host. You guys will have, if you guys have any questions, because yes, if you guys want to ask about the U.S. wrestling scene, how different is it compared to the Philippines? Anything else that you guys have any questions with, you have the floor.
Okay, I think I have one. How easy is it for people to break through? I know that like places like AW, especially AW, would give tryouts to local talent, but how long is the average grind to get to at least a recognizable spot in the industry from the grassroots?
I'm glad you asked that question. There is one wrestler that comes to mind. He's the bad apple.
The Brian Keith.
His name is Brian Keith. So one episode that we have was with an instructor, JJ Blake, and we talked about Brian Keith and LinkedIn. It depends on how noticed they are. And it's who you know. It always is. And going to WWE, we wouldn't have a Bianca Belair without Mark Henry. We wouldn't have a Jade Cargill without Mark Henry. But of course, there is the long grind of just getting your name out there. And it depends. It could be years, it could be months, but it's still a grind. And that's why the Texas wrestling scene has been a very interesting ground for a lot of these wrestlers coming up. Brian Keith is an example. Roxanne Perez is in Houston, Texas, where she went through a lot of promotions to get to Ring of Honor first before the AEW acquisition, and now she's in NXT. So it's who you know, but at the same time, it's the look of the draw sometimes. So
I'm curious about the I guess the invisible barrier or barricade between wrestling fans and the indie wrestling scene, because is it actually pronounced? Is it established? Or do the wrestlers in the independents in the US also cultivate individual relationships with the fans? Because here in the Philippines, it's kind of weird where there's a lot of crossover going on where the wrestlers are also sort of kind of friends with the fans. So it becomes a community event whenever these local wrestling shows happen. But also, because those lines are blurred, the relationships get a little bit toxic.
Actually, it's interesting how it is based on the promotions that they're on. And particularly, I live in Austin. And all these promotion shows, there is a lot of cross-pollination between the fans and the wrestlers. But either way, and I'm noticing this when I'm talking to these wrestlers, as long as they have the support, as long as they're getting the recognition that they have as wrestlers, it does get toxic depending on who it is. I'm not going to name who. That's things are going to turn sour from there. But as long as they have the support over time, the barrier to entry is pretty accessible once you get to have a conversation with them.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, no, it really is weird here, I think, that in a way, because I think despite being wrestlers, we're also still pretty much fans. And despite, I'm now 2 degrees closer to Bryan Danielson because of Zack Sabre Jr., but I'm still also a fan, and that's pretty weird. Do you feel the same way? I mean, do you think wrestlers in the, I guess, lower levels of the scene are also like that? They're still fans, and they're still, despite, trying to break into the business or in the process of breaking into the business?
Absolutely. And it's interesting how even after matches, and especially the wrestling shows that I've been on, we would talk, like there was one guy that we talk a lot in Austin, Dmitry Alexandrov. We would talk New Japan after the show, and we would talk about death matches because he's a death match specialist. But through the end of it, at the end of the day, they're still fans, because like they will have tributes on some of their matches. Like there could be a throwback to Gabashi. There could be a throwback to I forgot the name of the match that was involved. There was a lot of New Japan that happens too. So like they're still fans because they're living the dream of like doing these moves that they've seen as fans and doing things in ring. So at the end of it, yeah, they're absolutely fans. Like I said, like once there's a conversation with everybody, like we still talk matches even after the shows.
I bring that up because Stan and I are in the business, and it could very well be that one of us gets called up to play characters, or Stan is already in the WWE itself, but we both still analyze international pro wrestling on TV like a couple of smarks, and I've always joked that all my opinions about wrestling is never going to make me hireable in the major league. So it's something that the more senior wrestlers I know actively discourage, because of course you're talking about people who would be your coworkers or could be your coworkers someday, and I feel like I'm putting myself in a rather precarious position here. But I don't know. Does that happen there? I mean, maybe for you, what do you think? You're pretty close to your local scene, but do you have you put yourself in that position?
That's a deep question.
Yeah.
Honestly, like having that, I mean, for me, it's, man, wow, that's a really, Alan knows that was a fun for Pilgrim. That was really good. Honestly, with the content that I have now, I'm still growing, and I think part of why I kind of kept this going is like my love for professional wrestling has been kind of it has been like growing a lot lately, and recognition, I mean, it's cool for me, but especially when I do the podcast here, I'm here to tell a story and to have the conversations with the wrestlers that I have over the year, and a lot of this I have like sports figures, but recognition, I mean, that's great, but for me it's it's a path that I'm still currently going. So I don't know. I honestly don't know, but like for me doing this podcast, doing a lot of this, it's always been I never really got the recognition for it, but as long as like I put a platform on them to share their stories and pass them to whoever they're listening, whether it's their fans and on their social media. So yeah, I never really had that thought. That's a good question.
Okay.
Yeah. Just something. I guess pick your brain on because the Philippine wrestling scene is so weird just because it is so young, and when you think about it, when we see each other at things like Comic Cons here locally, right? It's neutral grounds where we're all there as fans, right? So like, how do you maintain that distinction without being too egotistical that you come across as being bigger than what you really are? You get what I mean?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's a uniquely Filipino problem because of how
uniquely Filipino. We found it.
because of how young the scene is and how much how much we put the anywhere else and the wrestling scenes of everywhere else on these pedestals. Anyway, that's something to think about. I think that's all we got.
Yeah, I think being in the US, and I'm learning this as I'm starting to grow, especially in the Texas scene. It's a very much a legacy driven state here in the US, and the history is very deep. Honestly, I just want to put my name out there in the wrestling scene, and if it materializes, it's awesome. But that's a good question. Yeah, I haven't really thought because I'm still grinding that out. But I never put myself in that position. Like I mentioned on the last question, I'm just a platform. I am just there for them to share their stories. And I never really like drive myself. I don't want to wedge myself in their story. I'm just there to really just share that to everyone that they can. If that makes sense.
I've got one question for you. What do the letters in the podcast's title stand for? PGTK.
Okay, that's the second guess. So it's gonna sound cliche, and it's called Project Get to Know. And
that's nice.
All right.
Originally, it was supposed to be that, because the podcast for me, it's funny you brought that up, Stan, where it's a TV show, but I think part of why the podcast came to be is to really understand, whether it's in wrestling or in sports, or in this case, like I had like a musician on, like to understand and see how they think, and literally picking each other's brain, picking the other person's brain and understand what their position is. And over time, someone stopped me from doing the entire thing, and then just put that as an abbreviation, PGTK. Okay, someone's gonna ask.
Hey, it's a much better acronym. It's a much better acronym than other acronyms we've come across.
Yeah.
What I wonder. Explain.
Not on the record.
Not on the record.
Yeah,
that's it.
PGTK, Project Get to Know. It's actually a good title. Now that you fleshed it out for me. So thanks.
Yeah, there you go. If someone asks, there's an episode here, and I have a prior episode that's just like the abbreviated.
Yeah, that's all we got, I think.
Awesome. So I'm gonna end this conversation with this, and I always do this with all of my guests. And this is gonna be a bit of an introspective question, so I'm gonna lay it out there. So the World Health Organization listed adolescents between the ages of 10 and 19. Now, between those age ranges, people tend to pick things up along the way. Now, for you, Stan, and for you, Ro, if you were in the same room as young Stan and young Ro, I'm not going to say the age. But if you're in the same room as that, what would you like to talk to them about?
I wanted to talk to them about the dreams that we had. So it's the same dream that I had. I'm living the dream that I had in those years. That kid who was doing push-ups and and doing curls with 2 dumbbells that he found at home, and I would like to tell him that we have made it. We've achieved what we were going for, what we thought wasn't really possible 20 years ago. So that's something I would love to cheer him on. And tell him to and show him a list of things that he could do a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can identify a particular age, probably 15. I would talk to 15-year-old me and tell him that you'll actually get to have the ultimate dream job, right? Like who from the Philippines can even conceive of the idea that they would be working for the WWE in some form, right? It's one of those shoot for the moon types of things that nobody really expects would actually come true, right? But in this case, it actually does come true. I would also tell him that the girl that you meet while working your summer job will eventually be your wife, and that in like 19 years, you'll actually tie the knot and move into a house that you buy with your own money and that type of thing. So so it gets better. Cheer up, it gets better, so much better, wilder than your wildest dreams. So yeah.
Awesome. But thank you so much, Ted. Thank you so much for having us. Yes, we had technical difficulties, but this was better than I thought. This was better than expected. And
Yeah.
speaking about I actually messaged you guys because I was listening to one of the episodes, and it's kind of nice hearing the fellow kababayan, which is our countrymen in Tagalog, and hearing the scene from your guys' perspective. I kept listening to your stuff and seeing that, yes, it is, was it the world's the longest weekly
episodic Filipino wrestling podcast.
That sounds stuck with me. That's like I was laughing at that. I was like, wow, that is an oddly specific description. But hearing, at least like on the Filipino side of the wrestling scene, is kind of amazing. And checking a lot of the promotions over time, like it's nice to bring up how wrestling is a universal language. So I wanted to say thank you for having you on, really have the Filipino perspective in professional wrestling too.
No, we appreciate the fact that you're an actual listener who's actually in the US, because we used to joke about getting shooting up to number 39 in like Romania or in Kenya or whatever, which actually did happen when we checked the stats. So the fact that we have an actual listener in the US is cool. Maybe the next is to have listeners in London, Paris, and Tokyo or whatever. So
I believe in Joe Henry too. How about you, Ro?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's no, the thing about listeners are the shooting up to the charts in the other countries is real. I'm the one who checks the stats. I see it. But thank you so much. I'm also glad that you actually do tune into our episodes. I do hope. Sometimes I wonder to myself, should we talk as if we are talking to the whole world, or do we talk as if we're just talking to the Philippines? Because some people, especially when we post content or do a live stream on other platforms, they'll say, why aren't you talking to Filipino? But puro English, right? But ni Tagalog. So I think cases like yours kind of reinforce, although you can understand Filipino, they reinforce the fact that we really do need to talk in English, something like that. But thank you so much.
You never know. There it is. But I have nothing left to give. You guys have before. Where can we find you? And
okay.
When do you guys release the podcast? Which platforms, and when do you often release the episodes?
Yeah, so the Wrestling podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Episodes come out Monday, Tuesday, and Friday. Yeah. So Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, that's our release schedule. They drop anytime within those days. If you want to follow us on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, it is at Wrestling Podcast. On Twitter and on TikTok, it's at Wrestling2XPod. And then individually, if you want to hit us up, for me, it is at _Stansy. So it's _STANSY.
Yeah, for me, it's at Roiswar, ROISWAR on Twitter, if you want to talk to me on Twitter.